Well, good evening, all. Good to see you all here. There's an old poetic quote. Only one life 'twill soon be past. Only what is done for Christ will last. Only one life 'twill soon be past. Only what is done for Christ will last. Several years ago, I remember, not here at St. Lawrence, but a different placement, I remember seeing this young man who clearly was living, well, it kind of caught my attention because I would see him praying in the church when no one else was. That kind of stands out, you know? I would see him being very quick to serve. You know, sometimes we make little announcements at Mass, like, you know, we could use some help for this, that, and the other thing. And like, he was always the first one, like, there. And I would see little things like this, and so I came up to him one day and said, you know, I don't know you very well, but I'd like to get to know you a little better, and I can't help but noticing that I think you're taking Christ very seriously. I just said, like, would you mind sharing with me just a little bit of when that started, how that started? He said, well, it's kind of a long story. Could I schedule a meeting with you? Which I greatly appreciated. You know, he didn't just spill his whole pearls of his life. He's like, it's a long story. So we set up a meeting. And in that meeting, he shared with me a number of things, but the biggest thing that he said, and he gave me permission to share it, was a story. And he said, a year or so back, I went to bed. And then when I was asleep, I had a dream. Now, I've had lots of dreams. We all have dreams, he's saying, but this one I remember with crystal clarity. And he said, when I was asleep, there was this little light that was so bright and warm, it started coming close to me. And it just got more and more luminous and warm. And I felt like, he's like, and as I even speak, I can still remember my emotion was like, my heart was like jumping out of my chest because I was just like, I didn't even know what it was. I was just like, it's so good, it's so good. And as the light got bigger and more luminous, the face of Jesus came into vision. And the full person of Jesus came very close to me. And it was so bright, but I could see him. And he came all the way up to me and put out his hands. And not knowing what else to do, I gave him mine. And he took my hands into his, and with great luminous eyes, looked at them, and then looked back up at me, and then looked back down, as if admiring my hands. And then he looked back up at me and said, these are good hands. They will be used for good works. And then I woke up. And ever since then, I kept looking at my hands. Like, got to use my hands. He said they're good hands, as if he was admiring my hands. And so I started using them and my whole person. In today's gospel, I want to highlight 4 S words very quickly. They're all in the gospel. 4 S words. And the first is summon. The master summoned the steward. Summoned, which is an authoritative invitation or even command to come to be present. He summoned. God has the power to summon. And we know in the Catholic faith that God, out of his goodness, has summoned each of us into life. We are not accidents. We didn't just kind of like, oh, how did I get here? Like, he made us. He summoned us purposefully into life. And all throughout life, God is summoning us to follow him. That's the promptings of the Holy Spirit. But at the end of our life, when we breathe our last, and the Catholic Church says when we experience death, which is defined as the separation of the body from the soul, our God will summon us to himself to render an account of our life, just like this steward. And that leads to the second S. First is God's summons. God is a summons. And he will summon us as, second S, stewards. What is a steward? It's someone who is given responsibilities. And sometimes, I don't know if you've come to a Mass before and you've heard like the priest talk about like, it's that time of year where the priest talks about, please give money to our campaign. And the priest will say like, you know, we owe God our time and our talent and our treasure Fantastic. That's good. Homily for another time. But a steward, we are given responsibility of much more than just time and talents and treasure. Your hands were given to you by God to do good works. Your eyes were given to you to do his works. St. Paul says, we were made for the praise of me. No, we were made for the praise of him, of his glory. Is this how we see our faculties of our minds? What we put into our minds, our eyes, what they take in, what we do with our hands, what direction in life our feet are oriented? Because when God summons us at the end of life, and he's that warm light, but he will look at he will render an account of our stewardship, how we have used our responsibilities for his glory. And that should make us tremble a little bit. That's where we talk about the fear of the Lord. Summon, steward. You and I are stewards for the praise of his glory with all of our faculties, of all of our life. St. Paul will actually say in Romans 14, none of us lives as his own, and none of us dies as his own. For while we live, we are responsible to God. And when we die as his servants. Both in life and death, we belong to God. That is why Christ died for us and came again. We shall all appear before the judgment seat of God. For it is written, every knee shall bend before me, and every tongue shall give praise to God. So each of us shall give an account to God. The steward in the gospel had to give an account, which leads to the third S, which was his particular predicament. He had squandered his stewardship. Squandered means to waste. Oh, we waste so much of what God has entrusted to us for others, for the praise of his glory. He had wasted so much. I remember growing up, sometimes we'd watch movies as a family, and my mom was always trying to be careful about having us not watch those sex scenes, And sometimes she didn't know if one was going to pop up as we were kids, and so she would call them ceiling scenes, which meant she would say, ceiling scene. We're like, look at the ceiling, As she kind of blockaded the TV, And she's like, that's a conversation for later, Anyways, but she would sing these little songs. I don't know where she got them, And they were so annoying as kids, but I remember them. And one of them, she would say, oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. Oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. For the Father up above is looking down in love, so be careful, little eyes, what you see. We can see a lot of porn in life. And that will just really start to distort our vision for so much of life. We can spend so much time looking on Facebook Marketplace, Amazon Prime, more stuff, avarice, never enough. We will be summoned at the end of our life, and all throughout life, little summons, but at the end of life, it'll be a big summons to render an account of our stewardship. Hopefully, we will not be like this steward who squandered so much. Now, I've squandered a lot. You have too. So there's time actually to repent. Some people, actually I know several people who have had near-death experiences, NDEs as they're called casually. I like to think that this steward had kind of a gospel NDE, a near-death experience, because he got a little more time to shift his life. Summoned. Stewarding. Hopefully we don't squander, which leads to the fourth and final S. Serve. The final line in the gospel, 10 points if you remember this. Don't worry, I probably would never either. But the final line in the gospel today was Jesus saying, you cannot serve both God and mammon. Now, the Catholic faith is a lot of both ands. We don't want to put a false dichotomy in things. We believe in faith and reason. We believe in faith and works. We believe in truth and charity. We believe in justice and mercy. There's no dichotomy. They're a beautiful harmony, in fact. But there is one thing that is not a both and that is you cannot serve both God and stuff. You cannot serve both God and yourself. That is not compatible with the life of heaven. Only one life. 'Twill soon be gone. Will soon be past. Only what is done for Christ will last. And those little poetic lines are from, well, a poet. But he wasn't always a poet. Early 20th century, his name was C.T. Studd. Maybe that's where we get the original one, you know. C.T. Studd, I don't know if you remember hearing his name, but he was one of the best cricket players in all of Britain. Amazing, talented athlete. He did this for a number of years. Towards the end, he was kind of having one of those little come to Jesus moments. He's like, suppose I just come to the end of my life and it were now, even though I'm in my 20s. What good is my cricket? And in that little moment of questioning, he started to pray, and his mind was filled with great light, and that night he wrote the following poem, which I will read a few lines to close. Two little lines I heard one day, traveling along life's busy way, bringing conviction to my heart, and from my mind would not depart. Only one life, 'twill soon be past. Only what is done for Christ will last. Only one life, yes, only one. Soon its fleeting hours will be done. Then in that day my Lord to meet and stand before his judgment seat. Only one life, 'twill soon be past. Only what is done for Christ will last. Oh, let my love with fervor burn, and from the world now let me turn, living for thee and thee alone, bringing thee pleasure on thy throne. Only one life, 'twill soon be past. Only what is done for Christ will last. Only one life, yes, only one, let me say, thy will be done. And when at last I'll hear the call, I know I'll say it was worth it all. Only one life, 'twill soon be past. Only what is done for Christ will last.